I sent him a copy of what I had written in hopes it would bring back some memories to him. Corporal Olson came up to me and says, "Gene, let's go down there and see what we can get out of those tanks." And of course, he's corporal, I'm PFC, so I got to follow orders. So we went down. He jumped in one tank and threw out two 45s, once for each of us. And then he started throwing out cans of Van Camp's pork and beans. I don't know how many we had a slew of them. Well, what happened next? The Japs seen us, and they started dropping artillery on those tanks again. Well, Olson was inside, and I was hunkered down behind the tanks, and finally they quit the firing. He jumped out, and we picked up our booty and head back up where our foxholes were. That bombing at that time was nothing compared to what our sergeant chewed us out with for being down there. So, but they enjoyed the Van Camp's pork and beans, I'll tell you that. Up till the 27th, we had had a total of 9 killed in our platoon and 18 wounded. It was time that we was to move out, and we was going to prepare to hit Hill 362, which was one of the basic points that the Jap had set up to hold the island.
Now, was Hill 362 above or alongside the airfield? Airfield number 1 you've already passed.
Right.
The second airfield was on the other side of the hill, or was the hill part of the defense of the second airfield?
Hill 362 was alongside the up northern portion of the airfield on the western side of it, yes. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty much split. It was one hill here, the bigger portion over here, and kind of a ravine that went up.
That's why they called it A and B?
No, B's was another hill just about the same altitude, but on further north. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but the whole hill was just 362A. That morning, just before we moved out to get in position to hit 362, we were standing up in these deep foxholes that we had, and you could look up in the sky and just focus on one point, and you could see the artillery that the Japanese were firing. It was going over, just as it passed your line of sight. And while we stand there, all of a sudden we heard a thud. And 2 feet out, right in front of us, there was a little funnel place where probably a 75 millimeter hit and didn't go off. I was getting the feeling that I was having too many close calls. I was going to be in trouble one of these days.
You were wondering if your time was up.
Yeah, right. But we took off and made it almost to Hill 362 and dug in for the night. And then on February 28th, we advanced towards Hill 362. There was about 200 yards of open country going across to that. And our company was to hit it straight on. I Company and G Company was going to hit the hills on each side of us. Luckily, going across that open area, the Japs stayed in cover and didn't fire on us or anything. And we actually reached the hill before they started firing at us. We went into a little ravine that, or our platoon did, a little ravine that kind of separated the hill. And we got pinned down there where we couldn't even get back to our reformed lines. Some of the other two companies on each side of us were hit real hard at that point in time because the Japs came out of the caves and the tunnels and just bore down on us. There was about 12 guys shot in the first 2 or 3 minutes and all hit in the head. So they was accurate as far as their shooting. At that time, our corpsman that was attached to our platoon was working on 2 of the casualties that he had. And evidently there was some Japs close by him, and they threw grenades at him. And he threw the grenade back and kept working on the people. And they threw 7 grenades at him, but he refused to leave. He just kept throwing them back. And that 8th one, they held a little longer and killed both the ones that was wounded and killed the corpsman. Mm-hmm. He received the Congressional Medal of Honor for that. Finally, most of the company got moved back to reform our lines so we could see what we was going to do. We'd been hit real hard. And our platoon was still pinned down in this little ravine. And the sergeant had Olson go up and see if we could see where all the grenades and rifle fire was coming from, and he never did come back. So he sent me up there, and I'm standing by a rock, and a bullet hit right there, just about 8 inches from my heart. Another close call. Wow. Getting too many of those. But finally, things quieted down, and we got back to where the lines were reformed. And that day we had 25 casualties. We had 16 killed in our platoon alone, and 9 were wounded. When we fell back, we was at a small knoll, just about 200 yards from the hill 362. And we had a machine gun emplacement just on the front side of the hill, and I was to the right of the hill. That was a sulfur island. And the Japanese dug the sulfur, had workers doing it, and sent that back to the homeland. But it was always burning, always hot. And all night long, I was in a hot spot, and I had to keep turning over all night long because of the heat from the sulfur burning. In fact, I planted a can of sea rations in the ground and had warm chow that evening.
Your own private
stove, yeah.
Stove, yeah.
The next morning we woke up and we was told that we was just decimated so bad that the 28th Marines was going to take over. And a lot of our group was around the base of that little knoll. And there was a big trench to my left that the Japanese had dug out. And instead of a straight cut at the end, it was kind of like this. And we heard a whistle, and a shell went off at the top of the knoll, so we knew it was our own shell. It was a 37 millimeter. So everybody dove for the trench, and I got on the part where my head was sticking out. And the next shot, 37 lit right at my head, about 2 feet from my head. And it felt like the wind was knocked out of me. Had a little trouble breathing right there at first. And I looked up and I could see the ground steaming where the shell had hit. But
it was a Japanese shell?
No, it was our own shell. Yeah, friendly fire, which you can't get away from. Yeah. And of course, the majority of the blast went forward. I took off my pack, and a buddy of mine hit my back, and I said, "No, I'm fine." So I put it back on, and pretty soon I felt something running down my back. So I took my pack off, and my combat jacket and my dungarees were soaked with blood. So the corpsman came over and patched me up. But the blast went forward and killed one Marine that was around the base of that knoll, and Bob Neff got hit pretty bad in the lower section of his body. I was patched up and told to walk back to the beach, and so I could go aboard the hospital ship. And somebody picked me up in a Jeep, and he seen my 45, wanted to know if he could have it. He says, "You're not going to need it." I says, "Fine," and I gave it to him. When I got to the Higgins boat, Bob Neff was in there laying on the bottom of it. And he says, "Pebbles, is my legs all right?" He says, "They just don't feel right." And the corpsman kind of shook his head to me. And I told Bob, I said, "You're going to be all right. We'll be aboard the hospital ship real soon, and they'll take care of you." Well, he died that night, and I got to see him buried at sea the next day. From then on, we had about 21 killed in our platoon towards the end of the battle and 8 wounded. We ended up with 43 killed in our platoon in the headquarters company, 33 wounded, and there was only 5 in our platoon that got through without a scratch.
Well, this is like 2 or 3 times over. In other words, if the platoon ran from 12 to 15, and we had that many casualties. That means you were one of the few that remained standing, I guess.
Right.
Except for the friendly fire that took you out. The Japanese didn't take you out. An accidental hit,
Right.
you might say,
Right.
took you off the beach or off the island.
Yeah, we had the corpsman, like I said, got the Congressional Medal of Honor. Our lieutenant of the platoon, he was wounded, went back and got fixed up, came back, and he got killed later on. He was awarded the Navy Cross. We had 4 Silver Stars in our platoon and 4 Bronze Stars. I never did know what they did to get them, but I'm sure that they did something that merited that receipt. I was shipped to Guam at that point in time, and they operated on my back, and the shrapnel was too close to my spine, so they couldn't get it out. They just left it. But they opened up the wound where it would heal from the inside out. And we went back to San Francisco, where I unloaded, and was there just a few days.
The shrapnel is still in your body?
Right, it's next to my spine, yeah. Never bothers me.
No problems with
No.
weather, change in weather, nothing like that really affects you?
Only one time, just a couple of years ago, I went in to get a MRI on my neck. And it was the first time I had an open MRI. Closed MRIs never bothered me, but they always ask you if you got any metal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he shoved me in there, and as I was going in that to get the MRI, it felt like that they was trying to pull that shrapnel out. I mean, it hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But after I got in there, it wasn't too bad. But I complained about it, and he pulled me out and put some pillows underneath my knees and shoved me back in. And same thing, just as I was going in. Man, it burned or something. And he started taking the tests, and he says, "You got some metal in you?" I said, "Yeah, I wrote down on this slip of paper I did." Mm-hmm. And he assumed I had it in my legs, he said. You don't make an assumption like that.
No.
But I said, "It just hurts going in. I can stand the pain while I'm in there, so we'll go ahead and do it." But that's the only time I had any effects from my shrapnel. So other than that, it never bothers me, and I get my 10% disability check every month. But we went from San Francisco to the hospital at Great Lakes. I was there a few days, and then I got to go down to Indianapolis and visit my family, because I hadn't written them since before we had EWO, so they had no idea how I was.
Was the war still on in the Pacific?
Yeah, and EWO was still going on, yeah, at that point in time. And when they released me at Great Lakes, I had a 30-day liberty. Went down, visited the family at that time, ended up getting married then too, and headed for Holly Ridge in North Carolina and Camp Davis. It was an MP down there, and we was training Dutch Marines at that point in time.
So you were back on your feet, obviously.
Right, yeah.
Still serving in the Marine Corps
Right.
while the war was winding down.
Yeah. And somebody happened to look at my records and seen I went through a 16 millimeter training, tearing it down, running and everything. So they had me run 35 millimeter movies at Camp Lejeune for the rest of the time I was there. They had a chaplain that was living right close to us, and he drove to Lejeune every morning. So I rode up with him, took care of the film, showed a movie in the afternoon, and that night went back, enjoyed life at home. And I was finally discharged on February of 1946. I went back to work at the old electronic firm until they went belly up. And then I went over to the Naval Ordnance Facility, which made the Norton bomb site for all the bombers, and started working for the Department of Defense at that point in time. And I worked there until 1958 when we moved back out to Phoenix. And I was working for DOD at that time, buying equipment at all the plants in Phoenix and Albuquerque, Tucson. White Sands, and I retired in 1980 and moved up to the mountains where I built my home up there now. I went to one reunion of the 5th Marine Division, but didn't know anybody. Went to about 3 reunions of the paratroopers, and at one second reunion, some of the paratroopers had went over to Ewo on one of those trips that they took and brought back some of the black sand and put them in little vials that the 35 millimeter film was in.
So you have some of the
So I have some of the sand from Iwo Jima. Yeah. I'd like to close at this point in time, unless you have any other questions.
I think you've done an excellent job.
I have a certain philosophy that I wish the government would abide by. Discounting the war now in Iraq and Iran, because we don't know how it's going to end, what we're going to do, pull out, win, or what. But World War II was the last war that we went in to win and get a good action from the end. The Vietnam War, the Korean War, we sent our men over there to fight a containment war. And the only ones that win in a type of war like that is the enemy. We can't tie the hands of our young people going into any conflict unless you're willing to give full reins to finish the war. Otherwise, just stay out of it. My heart just goes out for the young generation now, because we've got a situation not like World War II, because terrorism is a whole different type of fighting. It isn't any one particular country normally that is backing it. There's a few that do, but to fight terrorism is going to be a whole new type of warfare, and how we're going to end up, we don't know at this point in time. I'm just really concerned about it. But I'll leave that to the younger generation to handle, I guess. I sure thank you for the time that you've given me. Maybe nobody will ever see this. Maybe somebody will, and learn something from what we did back then. We were just a bunch of people that came to the call of something that had to be done. They call us the greater generation, but we was just a generation that started a change that is continually growing and getting better each day. And I just hope our people always stick together to fight for this country's protection and our protection abroad when it affects us. It would be wonderful if we could save everybody in the world that wants to break away and have freedom like we have. But we don't have that capabilities. Just hopefully that we can help some receive the freedom and have the happiness that we have here. And that's my prayer. Thank you.
Well, Gene, I can't thank you enough for these concluding words. Besides the story of your exemplary service during World War II for the U.S. Marine Corps and the United States of America. So I'm sure that many will be hearing this message from you in the months and years ahead, your family especially, and of course the story will be sent up to the Library of Congress, so you'll be part of a national collection of veterans' experiences in not only World War II, but the conflicts that have followed. So on behalf of the Augusta